in America.
Vegas, yeah.
How was that?
Beautiful. Las Vegas is mad. You gotta go.
Oh, fuck. So you did Las Vegas?
Did Las Vegas. Went to the original Las Vegas. Went to Fremont Street.
Wow.
Beautiful. It's amazing. Amazing. Your head never stops.
See, like, I think if I was to go to America, Las Vegas would definitely be on my list. America doesn't really tickle my fancy, though, at all when it comes to travelling overseas. I think I am more for, like, Scotland and the castles and stuff like that, and then Italy as well, and Germany for, like, the beer culture, because Oscar and Dad did Beer Fest, and Dad just reckon it was immaculate.
So I've always wanted to go to Canada. I've always wanted to see, they call it the Icefield Parkway, so it's from Jasper to Banff.
Yep.
And it's, I don't know, about 200 kilometres, you can't pull off anywhere, just look at all these beautiful glaciers and amazing stuff. Lakes, Lake Louise, I've looked at Lake Louise since I was a kid, so I actually got to see it. It's this beautiful, you know, like turquoise green lake.
Whereabouts was it?
In
Canada, yeah.
And then when you go to, we went to Las Vegas, we flew from Vancouver. I love Vancouver, beautiful, beautiful town. And then went Las Vegas, and then we did a bit of tripping around. I've always wanted to see the Grand Canyon. Yeah. So we saw the Grand Canyon in Arizona, and that's Monument Valley as well. So the John Wayne movies with the big piers, you know, those big. So it's owned by American Indian people. Yeah. There's only one place to stay at Monument Valley, and you have these cabins that just look out on what they call the mittens.
How'd you go at Grand Canyon? Was that like a massive mind
blown? Away.
Yeah, wow. I was watching it on a movie the other day, and it was blowing my mind while watching this movie, and then a documentary. But yeah. Anyway, welcome, Deb.
Thank you.
Thank you for being on our podcast. You were very sought after. We've been trying to get. We spoke last year sometime about coming on, and it was pretty well just to discuss this topic. Obviously, you are a professional. You are a specialist in mental health and a psych nurse. And how long have you been a psych nurse?
I started nursing in 1991.
Wow.
I'm not old.
No, you're not that old.
So 1991, and finished my training, so hospital trained nurse in 94. Yep. And then I went to the Northern Territory. Wow. Worked in Alice Springs Hospital. Yep. In an acute service there. Yep. Came back. Was there for a few years. Came back to Mackay. Worked in a little tiny private hospital up there. Yeah. Doesn't exist anymore. The hospital. I think we had the first son up there. We did. Yep. I think we did. In 2000. A couple of years later, we moved back out towards Roma. Worked in a community mental health service out there.
Yeah, wow.
As a nurse. I acted for a while, about 18 months, as manager of that service. Yep. And more children. Used to come in, I used to drive in then as a community mental health nurse to Miles. Yep. I used to drive an hour from Warrambilla to Miles. Yep. And then I used to, do a couple of days a week. I'd go up to Taroom.
So you were never in Dalby at this point? This was
never in Dalby.
Wow.
It was the same team. It was the same hospital district. And late 2007, we relocated for Darren's work to Dalby.
Yeah, wow.
I only worked briefly in the mental health service here, and I then sort of worked in that service and then in another children's orientated service.
Was that well, since you've been doing it for so long, for a little while, yeah, exactly. What do you think have been like the biggest changes and the evolution of, the way we understand mental health and, especially men's mental health because it's a massive blossom topic at the moment that is probably only come up and arisen probably over the last, I'm not sure, probably 7 to 10 years.
I think men's mental health has always been, it's a devastating topic. Yeah. And I think because we live in such a rural area that it's been like this secret taboo thing to have. Yeah. So a lot of our men have been affected by drought, whether we work on the land,
yep.
whether we work in some sort of industry that supports men on the land. You know, when drought's happening, it affects every industry in a small town. I think that depression was always seen as a women's illness,
yep.
and not something that happened to men.
Yeah.
Men were strong and tough, and
it was almost like frowned upon. Or actually, no. Well, my example is I've just started watching Sopranos,
yes.
And when James Gandolfini, Tony Soprano, starts going to the psychiatrist, he doesn't want any of the other boys in the gang to find out because of, and you know, like that was such a massive TV show. Like that was the first probably massive TV series that started this long line of TV series that come out, and so for that to be such a main part of the first season is just like, oh well, that's pretty well what everyone, like a lot of men go through nowadays, where it is frowned upon, or it's probably not frowned upon, but it is like almost a secret, and it is kept in the closet. That
secret.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, we've got so many amazing sportsmen that have started to write their memoirs, and they're brave enough to write about, and they're promoting that they've suffered with mental illness of some type, that they've on the road to recovery. They talk about how hard that is. They're doing a massive job at breaking down stigma. Yeah,
and it's definitely working, because you can't bump into a organisation or an industry at the moment where they haven't at least, you know, made a comment on men's mental health, and like not obviously females industries, but more men's industries are talking about it a lot more, which is great to hear. And like it's good to hear that it's becoming a lot more apparent, and a lot more people are coming forward, and they feel more comfortable to actually accept that they are struggling.
I think it's just that as a whole society,
even
you know, for women, depression was not something to talk about. And it was, you know, I think we started to see probably when I was born, and back in that era, in those sort of 60s into the 70s, that we had a lot of women, a lot of new mums that were addicted to Seropax and Valium and things like that, because they
were... Seropax?
So it's a drug that's used to treat anxiety. And so a lot of women that were suffering things like postnatal depression that we didn't know about. It was like housewife syndrome. It was a bit of a put down and a put away.
Do you think that like the biggest difference with men's and women's mental health was probably that, you know, women had probably more apparent triggers like postnatal depression and giving birth, and then like once a month obviously with periods, and you know, like there's a lot more reason for it, whereas with blokes it was kind of like, you know, we are the blessed sex, you know, we've got nothing like that we can even like relate to in the slightest sense. And so like that's probably why women, like it was just it's okay for women to deal with this. And
I think we finally worked out that, you know, having children, the pregnancy journey, and having a baby, the delivery of the baby, is one of the most stressful things that a couple will go through.
Gotcha.
And you know, before that it was always secret women's business, and men weren't allowed in delivery rooms, and they weren't involved. It was always, I'm absolutely sure that
men weren't allowed in.
No.
Oh, I'm not going in, so that, like, it's cool.
No,
like,
I think you have to go in.
Really?
And you need to talk to your dad and, you know, my husband and whatever else. You've got to go in when you have children. And you got to. It's mind blowing.
But why was that just? That was just a thing that men just didn't go in when it was happening.
I think that it was back in those eras where, you know, women that might have been school teachers, when they married, they didn't work. You know, there were other professions as well that women stayed at home and had children.
And like, I think you still see that a little bit now, probably not a whole lot. A lot more old school people. Like I've still got friends of mine that are extremely old school, and it's just because they've had extremely old school parents. But I think the world is coming full circle in that it's accepting everything. Absolutely. And like everything's becoming more accepted now, and it's you know, like it's the people that get left behind are the ones that sort of like are the old school and like can't buy into what's changing and the change. So we'll go back to, you know, like a lot of our viewers who we're a lot younger anyway. We're like, what is depression and how do you think people can actually identify it? Like, because obviously we all have bad days. You know, you're gonna have a bad day here and there, but when the bad days just don't stop coming.
Yeah. I worked with a psychiatrist many years ago, and for me, depression is one mental health diagnosis. It's an illness. And, you know, you can't buy it, like you develop it. And he when I used to sit with him, with his clients, and he used to explain to people that he was giving this diagnosis to and explaining what depression is. He actually said that, he used to say, it's basically the inability to attain joy.
Oh, really?
Simple as that.
Yeah.
And that resonated with me. That was a bit like...
Yeah, wow.
The inability to feel happy.
Well, we were just talking, like, before the podcast about how depression is a blanket diagnosis for a lot of other mental illnesses that come underneath it, but may share, like, some very similar, but some drastically different, but are still under that blanket of depression.
Yeah.
So, do you think, like, that is, like, that's... I don't want to say cop-out, but like a bit of a, you know, you're misdiagnosing people who have other underlying mental illnesses rather than just saying that they, like, you're depressed. You're not manic depressed, you're not bipolar, or like they're the same thing, but like, you know, like you might have other things going on. And so like, that's where, I know you didn't want to talk about it, but like GPs come in and they're sort of just diagnosing that for a lot of different reasons.
Yeah, I think, you know, while our world has evolved and we've got access to internet and such a variety of information, which I think is great, that people can actually find out so much and they can seek and add to their own journey. The perils, I think, are that a little bit of knowledge is dangerous. And that we can tend to self-diagnose. And then we become sort of our own little experts where we can diagnose other people. Now, you know, as we talked earlier, that we have, in my understanding and in my exposure, that we talk about your well-being. So we talk about mental health well-being. And then we talk about mental illness. And we talk about mental health. And they're terms that are just used
blazingly amongst each other
as the same thing. Whereas my understanding is that well-being is about the way that you see yourself and accept yourself and the way that you see others. It's your connectedness to family or your community or your workplace.
I think that's the best way to probably look at that one as well. Actually.
Mental illness is hundreds of different diagnoses, and so mental illness incorporates depression and bipolar and schizophrenia and lots of other, you know, psychosis, lots of, you know, dementias and all those sorts of things come in under that blanket
of mental health,
health or mental illness. And mental health, I don't even really know what that means, to be honest. Like, as a professional, when you hear it being so, like, thrown around so freely, it's kind of like, what is he even, like, talking about? So my qualification, like, when I did my training, was a psychiatric nurse. And
are there, like, mental health, like, nurses? Like, that's the title that it's...
So suddenly I became a mental health nurse.
And
as times evolved, now a nurse is a nurse is a nurse.
Fair enough. So and when you got shortages out at the Dolby Hospital, then everyone's a nurse.
Everyone's a nurse. But so a nurse is a nurse is a nurse. You know, they don't tend to... There's a few professions where they sort of specialise, you know, but generally it's... Once we went uni-based, pretty much, it became a nurse is a nurse is a nurse.
So we were talking before, and I loved how you brought this up because I wasn't going to bring it up originally, but the black dog, and your explanation of the black dog yesterday, I think, was just exemplary. So could you just explain what the black dog is and how it can be understood, and like how people can understand it for themselves, because we could all look at it differently.
Definitely.
So, yeah.
Okay, so the black dog, I have to remember what I said.
Yeah.
Black dog is a term to describe depression.
Yep.
And I think it was a term originally coined by Winston Churchill.
Yep.
And he talked about suffering the black dog, so suffering with depression. I think it's stuck. We have a few really good institutions in like the Black Dog Institute. It's a specialist organisation that looks into mood disorders. And if you're looking for information on whether you might have depression or a mood disorder, the Black Dog Institute should be at the top of your Google list. Not us, Dolby. But so Churchill coined this term about this black dog. I'm aware of another Australian fellow called Matthew Johnson. Johnstone. It's spelled Johnstone. He is a Sydney-based person. He has published some books that talk about the black dog, and he's an illustrator. And he's illustrated his own experience of depression.
Oh, wow.
And he has images of himself sitting at a bar with the black dog on the bar stool beside him, and both of them crying in a beer. And he talks about the black waking up in the middle of the night with the black dog sitting on his chest. And, that anxiety and that doom and gloom and things. I think one of the other images that stuck with me out of his book was when we're talking about depression. It's a lot of symptoms, and you don't have to have all of those symptoms to get a diagnosis of depression. So we can have 100 people in the room, and they will all have similar symptoms. They'll have some in common, but if you think of all the different combinations that you can get, one of the inability to get joy, one of the symptoms is that you stop doing things that you enjoy doing. And Matthew Johnston he's drawn this image of a man standing there with a kite. And the kite's up in the air, but the string from the kite is down and running along the ground, and there's this big black dog sitting on the string. It's sort of this dog prevents you from doing what you really enjoy. That would be,
to a lot of people, I would imagine, who suffer depression, that'd just be the perfect example of what they are going through, or what they feel, because it would be like that sometimes. Like, you feel like you should be having a good time, or you should be happy, but you're just not in the event. And like all those terms you just used of like the black dog, like sitting next to you at the bar, and people who have their vices, who use their vice as a way to sort of ignore the black dog, or like get away from it. So like you could have the black dog sitting next to you at a pokey machine, or like doing drugs or smoking out the back and shit like that. All these like little triggers that if you're in a state like that, I imagine what's going to set you off, and what sets you off in a bad way. And so like, but when you're in that position, then you're going to take everything you can to sort of bring yourself back, but you're never going to be able to. So what do you think is is there a cure for depression, do you reckon?
My understanding, my belief is that you do recover. It's not an easy road. And it wasn't an easy road to get to be depressed either. And it's not an illness like an infection where you can be a bit finicky today and wake up tomorrow with raging tonsillitis. Depression is an insipid, like slowly happening condition. And I think yesterday we were talking about how your predisposition, like if you are predisposed to developing any sort of illness, it's happening in your body, in your cells, before you're even born. And then when you're born into your family, it's a lot of what you're learning and seeing in your family.
I think what you're saying about this yesterday was actually like mind blowing to me, even hearing this. And like you were saying about how time of conception as well is overlooked as such an important part of a baby being born and grown up, and what can come of it. That now it's being like studied that if you're concepted by drunk parents, that like that can affect you down the track too. So it's not just pregnant women drinking; it's actual time of conception.
And I just remember because you know that aside from being a nurse and working in mental health, that I work in schools. And every few years we have school nurse conferences, and we were listening to a fellow, he was a paediatrician, and so he was talking about some developmental conditions that don't become evident until you start school, and you're starting to I suppose learn social constraints and that sort of thing, that your behaviours start to become obvious.
And that's kind of something that you can't hide because you're thrown in a social situation with 20 other kids.
Exactly. And so that's not mental illness, that is developmental illnesses or issues or conditions. Conditions is probably the right word, and definitely not my area. But I just remember him saying, now all of you school nurses, because we go on and we do lots of education for ourselves about sexual health and sexual development and that sort of stuff. So he's basically stood up and said, when all you girls are talking about contraceptives and you need to tell your young people that there's no such thing as whining and dining anymore when they're deciding to have a baby, that conception should be planned, always be consensual, shouldn't it? And preferably with neither person intoxicated or drinking. Because
I think that's like one of the most interesting things, because me, like even being at my age, and I hear people I know, we're trying to have kids and stuff like that, and then you think of like, okay, well, usually the boat doesn't turn around until they've had, like, they're actually pregnant. And so, like, then it's just like, they're starting
to hit. Grow up.
Now they're hitting the gym. Now they're stopped drinking, and like now they're doing all this healthy stuff. But it's very interesting to think that if you're pissed with your partner and you get pregnant one night, that that's gonna affect down the road. And you said something about cortisol levels.
So there's a stress hormone. Chemical. That. Under high stress, if you're in a high stress situation, then your body produces cortisol to deal with the stress. And so pregnant women and pregnant men,
pregnant men,
partners, if you're both pregnant, if you're in a high stressful situation, if your relationship is not the best, and maybe there's a bit of argument, drug use, whatever, alcohol misuse, whatever it might be, cortisol levels go up, mum's cortisol levels go through the baby's body as well. It actually does affect the brain structure of the baby.
And that makes sense when you think about, like, the baby's literally connected to the woman, and the woman is literally keeping the baby alive.
And you don't just get your hair colour and your eye colour from those cells. You get your family's health history as well.
It's funny you said that about obviously, like, this is a little bit off topic, but with being like in schools and stuff like that, like, how do you find kids react to, like, almost confrontational, it might be, like, sexual health, like actually being like, because obviously you do your bullshit sex head where you're in a class full of 40 kids and you watch a video on how to put a condom on, but actually being in a room where you're one-on-one with like a girl that's approached you or a young boy that's approached you, and you have to be like, look, this is this and this is going to lead to this. Like, how do they react to that? Like, or does it just depend on the kid?
Oh, it definitely depends on the young person.
Yeah.
But I have to say to you that it would blow your mind if you knew half the people that I had spoken to one-on-one, you know, and I admired each and every one of them.
Yeah, wow.
It's a tough conversation.
Oh, God, yeah. And especially when you're, like, in those age groups, that's high school, to have with another adult that, you know, like, obviously they would be comfortable enough with you to tell you that.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. Like,
and, you know, like, it's a small town and some people know your child and, you know, that I'm not going to her because she's his mum or whatever it might be. Yeah. But Deb's
the best secret keeper in town.
I am the secret keeper, yeah. And, but yes, you know, and I think really initially once they've stepped through that door and then they've sat down and they've said whatever it is that's on their mind, that's the toughest part. Yeah. And then the conversation's quite easy. Yeah. And you know, I just love the little secret sort of signs or nods that I get now. Yeah. You know, see them out. Because now I've watched you all grow and you're drinking at the pub legally now. And
it's freaky for me too.
Now.
Well, I must be getting old then, because it freaks me out seeing 18-year-olds at the pub. I'm like, what the fuck are you doing? But because that, like, and we were saying how, you know, like, obviously they come to you during high school and there is a wave almost of anxiety, extreme levels of anxiety and depression through high schools nowadays, and it seems to just be getting worse and worse.
Yeah, I think that the stats are pretty high. Yeah. That if you are predisposed to developing a mental illness, I don't know, it's 70%, maybe 60 to 70%. Yeah. Of people, so the population that will develop a mental health concern or a mental illness usually have their first diagnosis or first consultation toward diagnosis somewhere between their teens and their late 20s. Yeah. So that's 70% of the population.
Yeah, wow, that's extremely high, isn't it?
That will develop.
I think I read a fact somewhere one time, and it was like the average high school student nowadays, it might have been in America, not in Australia, the average high school student in America suffers the same levels of anxiety as psych patients back in the 1960s. And they believe that, like, just because now there's so many avenues to help deal with it, or whether, you know, like, it's not so frowned upon now, that, like, it is so much more open and so much more apparent, or are schools getting harder, or, like, what do you think it is?
I think that what happens now is that as a society is much more fast forward than it was, and our young people, our youth, that's where we're making huge amounts of life decisions in a very short space of time. So we're often making our choices with school, whether we're going to go to university or we're going to go to work, or whether we're trying to find a job, we're getting car loans, we're probably, some of us, having our first intense relationship where we might be you know, thinking that this person is our forever person. Yeah, exactly. Some of us are experiencing for our first time our first sexual encounters. We might be, I don't know, struggling with our identity. You know, we're struggling with our identity, but we're then struggling with our sexual identity. We might be buying houses. We might be travelling overseas. We might be experiencing our first losses with regards to losing family members, death, those sorts of things.
And I think, I suppose, which, like, you can look at it one of two ways as well, in that it's, you know, a little bit harder. Like, this is what I mean. You could look at it either way, because I don't see it as being a lot harder, but it can be looked at as it's a lot harder for young people nowadays than what it was even 20 years ago to, like, buy houses, get loans, qualify for these sort of things. And then they're, like, you have to be overqualified for underpaying jobs, and so everyone wants a job. Everyone wants you to have experience, but no one's willing to give you the experience. And so I feel like there's just this well of a lot of kids that, or young adults even, that get stuck freaking out and worrying about stuff like that. I called myself spoilt yesterday in regards to I haven't had to stress about anything like that, but I've never really had to stress about much. So like I'm not really gonna even try to comment on it because I don't want to piss anyone off. But that's my take on it, is that like, while we can sit back and listen to how everything is in comparison, like your pop bought his house for $12,000 and you're looking at houses worth $200,000-$300,000. Like it all goes hand in hand because Pop was making $50 a week. So
yes, it's all relative, isn't
it? Yeah, and so I think it is getting a lot harder to acquire some basic needs, and a lot of people do struggle with that.
And I think we are in fast forward. I think that the chemicals that run our body and our thinking and our brains, that's the stuff that like we use the same chemicals for all the good things that happen in our life and all the bad things. So very often people will get a diagnosis of depression and they will say, but nothing bad's happened to me.
Yeah.
I've got a house and I've got a great family and, my kids are healthy and, I earn an income and I've been struggling to go to work lately, but I still, I'm on sick leave or whatever it might be. But it's the fact that we squash it all in into just a few years.
Yeah, and it is. It's pretty well straight after high school up until 24, 25 even, and then now it feels like it's getting later and later back. I know a lot of people freak out when they're 27 and they're like, I haven't got a partner, I haven't bought my first house yet. And it's like, well, everyone understands why you fucking can't, because it's so fucking hard, but I think though that is a perfect example of the difference between, if you're doing everything right and you still feel depressed, like you need to go find support. You need to find ways to get around it. It's the people that like do everything wrong. I say everything wrong, but what I mean is, like they're not exercising, they're not eating right, they're not hanging out with people that they know are good for them. They might start hanging out with different people, they might start smoking, they start to gain weight, and all that shit is massive. In like, it doesn't sound like a lot, but it turns out being a massive like butterfly effect on how your mental your like mental status is keeping up. So
I think that as a young person, as a child, there's a control element that you don't have. When you're small, your parents make all those decisions.
Yes.
They're deciding what you eat.
Yeah.
They decide when you eat. They decide when you shower. They decide really who you hang out with.
Yeah.
They decide everything. And then when you get to sort of those teen years, you're young adults, and that's when this big wide world opens up.
Yeah.
And lots of parents tend to loosen those reins a little bit, and they let you choose your own friends, and they let you choose what you're going to eat and when you're going to eat. You get jobs and you start mixing with people outside of your home.
Yeah.
And that's where you start learning about your finding those other reliable adults.
Yeah.
And I think you then start to see eyes wide open.
Yeah.
That you can look back on your family.
Yeah.
And you can see family warts and all,
Yeah.
Some of us will embrace that.
Yeah.
Some of us won't.
Yeah.
And I think that, just coming to terms with the fact that family isn't always perfect, and it might become very real that you have a parent who has been struggling with mental illness, and it's obvious to you then.
Yeah.
And we are talking about it in school, and it has been written into curriculum.
Yeah.
That the education that's being given then is that, yes, being aware of yourself, checking in on your own self, that yes, am I eating correctly? Am I getting enough sleep? That's harped on constantly at school about sleep, staying away from all of those bad things that rob you of your sleep with your blue lights that we didn't have back.
Yeah, exactly.
When I was younger, there was no computers and no phones and whatever else.
You're not that old.
Thank you very much.
Well, I was going to say, because it's... I think it was Jocko Willink. I'm not sure if you've heard of him. He's the Navy SEAL. He's amazing to listen to. He has a Joe Rogan podcast and David Goggins as well. Okay. They are both amazing to listen to, and they talk a lot about habit, good and bad, and like how you pretty well can, you know, like determine your life and set yourself up pretty well with good habits. And but they also talk about bad habits, and they use the term snowballing, which I loved so much. And the way they described it was, you wake up in the morning and you kick your toe on the bedside of the table, and it's almost like a sliding doors effect, where you kick your toe on the bedside of the table and you just let that get to you, and then you stew, and then you go for a shower, and it seems like there's no hot water, and then you get out and your towel's wet already, and then it's just like things just keep getting worse throughout the day. But if you just change your mentality, you know, you kick your toe as you get out of bed and you just move on. You just don't let it get to you, and then things just don't stop piling up. Like, things don't pile up at all, like, 'cause your mindset's just changed. And that's like when you're in a bad mood, little things become massive things. When you're in a good mood, little things are nothing. And so, but they also do talk about it takes 14 days to create a habit. You have to do something for 14 days straight, I think is what they said, to create a habit. So you start like small with making your bed, and so obviously that goes both ways with the bad habits. So like if you're, and Dolby would be such a good example for bad habits, in that you got people that get on the piss every single weekend here, and it's a habit where they get to Friday afternoon and they know it's piss sinking time, even though they might not think about it, they might not want to, you know, like they don't have the money for it, but then they keep themselves in this bad rut with money because they're spending all their money on the piss on the weekend.
I think it's I think life's all about everything in moderation. And you know, health experts talk about drinking and having, you know, so many alcohol-free days, and, you know, a lot of what's considered a binge, and I think bearing in mind that everything that you put in your body has every piece of food, every bit of alcohol, alcohol being probably the most toxic thing that you ever put in your body, but it has some sort of chemical reaction, has some chemical change, and when we're talking about mood and mental illness and well-being, it's a chemical-based reaction in our body. So, you know, because
that's what it is like depression is a chemical imbalance in the brain, is it not?
That's what they say.
So
there's a lot of theories, a lot of discussion about it, because we can't, you know, we can't genetically pinpoint. Well, I think they probably can now, but they can't pinpoint that gene there is going to come in you and you're going to develop whatever. But I mean, not like some cancers and things like that.
And like I've listened to, like, you heard the missus say before that she has to cop the mental health chats, where I'm like trying to motivate everyone and I'm trying to keep everyone positive. But I think, like, even with my mindset, and I was holding off on this podcast because I didn't want to piss anyone off. But it was just like environment for me, even in that, like, it's so personal for everyone in what works and what doesn't work. And that was a massive learning curve for me, even in the last couple of years, of like understanding that what works for me is, you know,
not going to work for someone else.
Is not going to work for everyone.
And I think that's where we're starved on this side of the divide, of the Great Divide, is access to, there's no one way to manage your depression. There's oodles of ways to manage depression.
Exactly.
But I think that here, this side of the divide, not just here in Dolby, but this side of the divide, becomes a very medical model in how you approach. There's definitely pluses for that. But I think that by the time people have exhausted, you know, when people start to notice changes in themselves and they start to have that feeling, it's a void of emotion. And it's irritating. You know, it's all those negative. I remember clients saying to me, you know, Debbie, can you just imagine being as sad as you can imagine yourself being, and then double it, and then double it. And then at the same time, you've got to imagine being as angry as you can be, and double that, and double that, and then as jealous, and all those emotions that we tag as being negative. So I've never heard those people talk about positive emotions, you know.
Yeah.
I've got elation, or I you know, feel really excited at the thought of this person coming and visiting, or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
But it was only ever the negative.
Yeah.
Negative emotions.
Yeah.
And I can't get rid of them.
Yeah.
It's not like flicking on a switch.
Yeah.
And I've been slowly getting to that point over weeks and months.
It would, yeah. And like, it'll be one of them things forever, because it's not something we can physically treat, you know, like it's not something that we can go, oh, you know, like this is broken, we can fix this, work, we can do, like they do what the best that they can do with antidepressants and stuff like that, but it's not something that you can mend without like talking and without getting over it.
There's
in a way.
Therapy.
Yeah.
There's definitely chemical therapy with antidepressants, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
But there's lots of different types of antidepressants.
Yes.
And they work on different...
Do they work differently in like, do they have different side effects, or for like they treat this person with this type of depression with this type of things? Oh,
definitely.
Okay.
So we have synapses in the brain, like little communication rooms.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, like this little room.
Yeah.
That, you know, a message comes in from that side. You know, there's little people here. There's little message deliverers in the middle.
Yeah, yeah.
And, you know, they grab the message and they take it across to someone receiving it over there. So there's hundreds of them in your brain.
Yeah.
And it's in that part that antidepressants work.
Yeah.
So some antidepressants make sure that there's more message receivers at that end. Some says there's more like transporters, the message transporters, and then some works on the senders. Yeah. And sadly, people usually commencing on an antidepressant have to try more than one antidepressant till they find one that works for them.
That's exactly right, but it takes months before they realise that it's not working, or that it works but it triggers something else. And
it's all about the symptoms that they're experiencing. So once their symptoms start to reduce, and then, you know, the motivation comes up a bit, and, you know, that's when people are most at risk, when their motivation starts to lift. If not everyone that's depressed feels suicidal or contemplates suicide.
I think that is a big like misconception with depression, is that not everyone is suicidal. Like who is depressed? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I think that when you have family or friends who have attended therapy, a doctor, and they've got they've received a script and they've just started commencing chemical treatment, that first few months is the highest risk time. That is when we really need to
get in there,
envelope them and look after them and support them. And it's definitely the toughest time for family as well.
I think people also shouldn't you know, like there is a lot of other stuff that must go with, you know, like obviously understanding and taking the first step and getting the antidepressants is one thing, but you got to do other background shit, you know, like absolutely. You've got to put in the work other ways, and you got to see what's working for you. And so like what would be your best advice that you could give to someone who has already taken that step but is just, you know, like can't find what else will help them?
I think that when you make that step when it's become evident to you that something has changed, that I'm no longer quite myself, that I'm not getting enjoyment, I'm not involved in me as much as I used to be, that you need to have that reliable person go with you, be linked in with you. I still believe that even though we go to the GP and we get our medication or whatever, it still tends to be this very soul journey.
Yes. Yeah.
And I don't think, but it's not. Depression doesn't just affect that individual, it affects that individual.
Yeah.
The collateral damage is huge.
Yeah.
So it affects that individual's relationships, romantic relationships, friendships, family relationships, whatever. But we don't have systems that are set up where we can do family therapy. Family therapy is a very unique system. So if you have a family member who is suffering depression, then you all probably really need to go in to therapy
Yeah.
and education and learn.
Yes. So I was going to say that education would be a massive part of it, in that, like, not just those that are educated, but like the massive lack of education in, like, I remember even going through, like, our school, the only class that would have touched on health for our mental health would have been health itself, and that was a class of 30 kids out of 190.
Yes.
And so, like, not to say that it wasn't touched on in other, you know, like, other aspects of high school or, you know, PC and stuff like that, but, like, there was only 30 kids through grade 11 and 12 that would have been actually educated in mental health, how to do it, how to seek out help, how to identify it and shit like that. And so, like, I definitely think it should be something that's, you know, taught a lot more in schools and, like, force-fed to kids, if that's, like, a term you can use. But so
definitely, I think that you know, it's written into curriculum now, you know. It's early stages still. It's still very vanilla. It's still not very real. What you're taught, it's really not gritty enough.
Fuck, I love that term, vanilla, because that, like, that's why, like, anyway,
it's still very vanilla. I think that we nearly almost mislead our young people in that. Like, I think that I'm not sure that school's the right place for it. To be honest. Because I think that we set up some very vulnerable people with a very small understanding. You know how we said earlier that a little bit of knowledge is often very dangerous. And I think that we plant that seed in that environment, and then we don't tend it. We don't do anything more with it.
Is that why, like, there probably a lot more self-diagnosis through high school of, you know, people have been told that little bit of information of, like, this is what depression is, this is what anxiety, and then that's all they're told. And so that when they have a bad week or a bad couple of weeks and they're like, oh, you know, I must be severely anxious or I must be severely depressed. And so
there are a lot of physical illnesses or physical conditions that mimic depression.
Really?
And so that's where it's really important that you don't self-diagnose and that you do go and talk to your GP. There are, you know, you can have a thyroid issue that, you know, can affect your mood. A lot of people that have diabetes, they exist comorbidly with depression. You know, hormones play a huge part. Period pain, you mentioned period before. You know, it's like this little, not little, but it's it's like a slight experience of depression just due to pain. You know, you can have a pain-induced depression, which is very, very different. It would be, because, like, like, I imagine that it would be a lot, like, it'll go away eventually, whereas, like, depression is just hangs around forever. And you mentioned earlier different types of depression. So there's, like, reactive depressions. It usually comes from some experience of a trauma. You know, if you're driving from here to Toowoomba for the day and you witness a horrific car accident, that's gonna fuck you up. You know, you end up with some PTSD symptoms. Maybe you can end up with two together. If you're predisposed, you know, the other thing about chemicals, you know, taking an antidepressant, if you're predisposed to bipolar, then if you're the antidepressant that you're prescribed may push you into a manic episode. It's a complex, very involved. I think with the, like, expansion in medical diagnosis and even medical science, I think we will get to a point where we can, you know, like, there will be a lot simpler ways to treat and identify depression and other sort of mental illnesses. But I just think we're just not there at the moment. I don't either. And I think, you know, we have specialists, we have psychiatrists and psychologists and social workers and, you know, all those people that specialise in that area. I think we have still lots of members of the community that dabble in that, and they sort of hijack people from getting involved with those specialists. Fair enough. Through stigma. want to go and see a shrink for.
Yeah, exactly. So the last question, I don't mean to spring it on you, but is what is the best advice you've ever received in your life?
Oh gosh.
Yeah. So we've had some interesting. We have had some interesting ones. We've had some also boring as fuck ones. But
well, I've been thinking this is a pretty heavy topic.
Yeah.
That we're talking about here today. The best advice that I've been given.
Best life advice.
Best life advice. I don't think I've got anything really earth-shattering.
Well, we've just had this massive, more like not morbid chat, but a very interesting and educational chat. I'm sorry that I had to bring you in for this, but you are obviously the best person to talk to about this.
I'm just familiar for you. I'm definitely not the world's expert.
Yep.
There are definitely so many more people that have so much exposure.
Well, there's a lot more people that consider themselves experts because they've been there, and so I think like you actually having the education and dealing with like people that have dealt with it is probably it would make you a lot better to talk to than someone who's just been there.
I think we're all our own expert.
Yeah.
We're all definitely our own expert.
Yeah, yeah.
And, if I ever experienced depression, it would be vastly different to your experience of depression. And exactly. It manifests from vastly different area.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that, anyone has a more worse experience or a more better experience or whatever. We just have different outcomes and we're different. It's like anything. It's like your experience of diabetes or knee replacements or whatever it is.
Had to bring up knee replacements. You look straight at me too. Anyway, thank you so much, Deb, for coming on.
Absolute pleasure.
If you made it this far in the episode, I'm sure we educated you today, or we helped you out. So massive thanks to Deb for coming in. We'll see you next week.
See you around.
Cheers.